Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where the Brits are taking their first swing at the Platoon patrol. Specifically, we've got some armoured infantry in FV510 Warrior IFVs. We haven't quite gotten round to covering the actual British infantry yet in the unit guides. It's going to make a lot more sense to cover them in detail when we go over the mechanised infantry, because I've already got a unit guide for the Bulldog. The quick rundown here is that armoured infantry platoons are organised into 3 7-man strong sections with a good mix of small arms, plus a 4-man platoon HQ that includes a 51mm light mortar. The standard for the platoon patrol is to take the best equipment options available, so all the warriors here are fitted with RAP 2, giving them some much improved protection against heat warheads. They're going to be tackling a reinforced squad of much better trained and motivated US Marines defending one of 5 locations on our map. We're starting from entry point 2 again, and to cut a very long story short, I checked out Echo and Charlie from a distance, then went to Bravo and Alpha before resigning myself to the reality that once again the Marines were over at Delta. Approaching from Alpha, one of the warriors took a few pot shots when the enemy tried to snipe out the unbuttoned TC. The dinged warrior didn't get a spot or even a contact icon, but the fire definitely came from Delta. This is by far the most commonly attacked objective in the platoon patrol so far, to the extent that every now and again I have to go and check that the randomness is actually working. It is working, but we have covered this so many times I don't think we really need to go into all that much detail on my options. I do need to develop this contact though. The warrior platoon is spread over 300 metres between the Charlie orchard and one of the unnamed compounds closer to the map edge, with 2 sections already dismounted and up on some of the rooftops to get a better view. What I want to do is manoeuvre at arm's length to get some solid spots, hopefully identify the Marines' small teams and then neutralise them before I get any closer. Delta's surrounded to the front and left by its own little orchard, which is dense enough to make line of sight unreliable, so I decide to go right. There's a little bit of elevation over there that offers both a better view into the Delta compound and some reverse slopes to hide behind. So 2 and 3 sections hold their positions around the unnamed compound, with their warriors using their thermals on overwatch, while the platoon HQ and 1 section pass behind them and get up onto the higher ground. The HQ team climbs on top of a farm building. I want them as high as possible so they have more options for their mortar. 1 section goes further to the right and dismounts behind the racial strikers used on the very first run. I'm a bit sloppy with their orders here. One of the fire teams ends up kneeling out in the open where the Marines engage them and get some hits in. The platoon HQ spots the offending enemy team. They're on the wooded corner near building D10. At the same time, Warrior C in the unnamed compound spots one of the small teams that's in the rear on top of building D6. So now I have something to work with, and the warriors get stuck in with their cannons. I don't have high expectations. The Rarden as modelled in Combat Mission has a very slow rate of fire and frequent interruptions to reload. To start with, I'm not surprised. The D6 Small in particular is able to escape the worst of the fire going its way, as any incoming 30mm rounds that make it past the intervening foliage have a tendency to just skim past into the distance thanks to that flat trajectory. The D10 contact has a very different experience. Warrior B out on the right has enough elevation to be firing down on the Marines, and rounds that fail to hit them directly impact the ground nearby. After a few turns, that enemy team is out of action. Neutralizing that corner presents an opportunity. There's no sign of any other Marines in that area. I know that one of the small teams is at the back on top of D6 where it can't cover that corner. And while I don't know where the other one is, I feel like I would have spotted it by now if it was on any of the closer buildings. In other words, it looks like the D10 corner is not only open for business, but that I can approach it without too much risk. Granted, I don't have good line of sight to the left side of the Delta compound, and there might be something in there with some anti-tank teeth. But at the same time, all those intervening trees in the Delta orchard work both ways for spotting. I'll be rushing warriors down the side of the irrigation ditch with their era panels facing the threat, and if I can get some smoke in there, I think they'll have a solid chance to deposit their dismounts. So I start remounting 3 sections to make the run and trying to get the platoon HQ to put some 51mm mortar smoke on that corner. Unfortunately, the mortar doesn't seem to want to fire from the roof. Ordering them out and behind a hedge, the platoon HQ attracts some fire, this time from another Marine fire team in the undergrowth between D8 and the closer bridge. In a way, that's good news. With 2 of the 3 Marine rifle teams spotted, the chance that the 3rd will be in a position to cover the D10 corner seems pretty slim. It also allows me to engage them with more 30mm cannon fire, and again, Warrior B on the right proves to be an excellent shot. On the other hand, the platoon HQ is too busy avoiding getting shot themselves to get any smoke out, and to complicate things, the D6 S'more starts firing rockets at 1 section and Warrior B. Luckily, 3 section doesn't need any help on the run in. While Warrior B is nailing the Marines near D8, Warrior D bum rushes down the side of the ditch, pops smoke and kicks 3 section out. The smoke drifts between them and the compound, blinding any Marines in there but not the Warriors thanks to their thermals. It's looking good, but I've gotten lucky. The other Marine small team is on the balcony of D3, where they can see behind the smoke screen. Warrior D only gets away with presenting its side armour because multiple incoming heat rockets catch on the trees between them and the enemy. The Marines quickly get engaged by Warrior A, up by the platoon HQ, then Warrior C back at the unnamed compound, and finally Warrior D itself. The small team gets plenty of 30mm HE back for its troubles, though I order Warrior D to switch to the coax to get some more consistent suppression going, and 3 section to join in from the ditch. Thankfully, the small gunner gets the message and takes cover, though that doesn't save him from a 30mm round from Warrior A. At the same time, the small team on D6 has managed to repeatedly miss Warrior B in 1 section over on the right. The platoon HQ has finally got its eye on with the light mortar and manages to land a few close hits. One of them takes out the small team number 2. A few turns later, Warrior B cuts the actual gunner down with the coax. The surviving small team member up in D3 gets the same treatment from Warrior D, and all of a sudden, the AT threat has been pretty much neutralized. 3 section has moved up to the edge of the Delta compound without any trouble, and 2 section is rushing in to back them up. Cautiously moving into the compound over the next turns, it's clear that there's still a little bit of resistance on the right. 2 section comes under fire from the old contact near D8. But shuffling the nearby warriors about brings a torrent of coax fire into the fight, and 2 section's A team was already moving down the ditch to work the flank. A couple of hand grenades and some close range fire later, the incoming fire stops. Sending the B team in to check reveals that we've bagged the Marine HQ as well as any survivors from the original contact. That leaves just the 1 rifle team somewhere in Delta. 3 section has gone left to check building D3, and their B team stumbles onto the enemy as they probe into building D4. The Marines are in the undergrowth next to D6 and get the drop on the Brits. This is close range stuff again. There are only 3 squaddies in D4 and they all get taken out pretty quickly. But I know where the enemy is now, and I can flex the rest of the platoon to get the job done. 1 section and the platoon HQ both remount and start to swing right to get the far flank working, while 2 section approach via D6 itself, and Warrior D enters the compound to provide some close-in support. It's all over a few turns later. Suppressed by Warrior D's chain gun, the Marines are pinned in place for 2 section as they come in from the flank. A bit of close range mopping up, and the enemy are all accounted for. Overall, the British Armoured Infantry sustained 4 casualties, 1 from 1 section near the start to some long-range small arms fire. The other 3 were from 3 sections B team, which got wiped out in building D4 near the end. Taking those losses away from the 1,000 points the Brits got for securing the objective, they end up with a final score of 963, scraping past the German Panzer Grenadiers and their Marders to slot into 2nd place by a single point. In fact, they actually had a very similar performance to the Panzer Grenadiers in general. The Brits got the job done in 22 minutes with 16% dismount losses, compared to the Germans doing it in 26 minutes with 17% losses. That is all arbitrary stuff though. For me, I'm not going to lie, this was a bit of a surprise. After doing the unit guide for the Warrior and testing out the 30mm Rarden cannon, I went into this thinking that the Warriors were going to be a bit crap. I thought they didn't have the firepower to get the job done, which would mean the dismounts would have to do more work and suffer more casualties as a result. Instead, the Warriors actually inflicted most of the casualties, 14 out of the total 19. and 8 of those were scored by Warrior B from its position on the high ground to the right. There are a couple of things that might have influenced that. Firstly, being at a higher elevation meant it was firing down on its targets, which was much more effective. Second, it was engaging enemy infantry in tiny patches of woodland. Infantry in combat mission had this distressing tendency to cluster up in a big dog pile behind a single tree, which would obviously make that 30mm high explosive much more effective. But for want of a better term, the Warriors did have something of a sniper vibe to them. For all its failings, the Rarden cannon is definitely accurate, and here at least I think we can safely say that that accuracy went a long way towards compensating for the atrocious rate of fire. It was basically the accurate fire of Warrior B that opened the way up for Warrior D to bum rush up to the objective and unload through section almost right on top of it, instead of them having to slope through the ditch like everybody else. That manoeuvre was definitely a calculated risk, and it's a risk I probably wouldn't have taken if the Warriors didn't have explosive reactive armour. I think they're the first vehicle we've seen in the platoon patrol with ERA, having the potential to shrug off the Marines' small and fire team anti-tank weapons does provide a bit of a confidence boost. That said, there was a small team covering that angle, and the only reason we didn't get to see Heat Rocket versus Warrior add-on armour was because a helpful tree decided to eat several incoming shots. If the platoon HQ had managed to get its axe together and smoked up the D10 corner, we might have avoided getting engaged there at all. I'll have to do some testing to get to grips with the 51mm as modelled in combat mission and see if I just dropped the ball, I got unlucky with incoming enemy fire disrupting the gunner, or there's something else going on that stopped it from firing off all that smoke it carries. And of course, as per usual for NATO infantry, once the dismounts actually got onto the objective, they cleaned up pretty fast. No big issues there. I think the casualties they got in this run fall into that familiar cost of doing business in dense terrain category. My main concern throughout was that they would get chewed up because the Warriors wouldn't be able to help them, and that was entirely unfounded. So that's the British Armoured Infantry storming through the platoon patrol like they've got something to prove. Not so much to say as I thought I might have to, because it actually went quite well. I really didn't think they'd give the Martyrs a run for their money. But with them out of the way, we're moving on to Group 6, where we've got a choice between Syrians in BTRs, Canadians in Nyala MRAPs, Dutch mechanised in YPR 765s, and US heavy infantry in Bradleys. Definitely a high-low mix in this group, interesting choices all round. As always, for the long-suffering Canadian fans, we will get through them all eventually. That's it for this video though. If you'd like to watch these early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.